The Middle East, once again, finds itself at the center of global attention, as a series of events unfold that could shape the future of international relations and global security. The United States and Israel launched airstrikes targeting Iran's nuclear facilities, an aggressive move that sent shockwaves across the region and the world. These airstrikes, designed to dismantle Iran's nuclear program, represented a significant escalation in the ongoing tension between the West and Iran, yet they were only the beginning of a far-reaching chain of events. What truly shocked the world, however, was not the airstrikes themselves, but Iran's immediate and calculated response. Within hours of the airstrikes, Iran launched a series of retaliatory ballistic missile attacks, marking the first time in modern history that Iran directly targeted a U.S. military base. The attack was carried out on the Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a major U.S. military facility in the heart of the Middle East. The base, home to American forces stationed in the region, was struck with multiple Iranian missiles, sending a powerful message of defiance to both the United States and Israel. The scale of this retaliation was unprecedented, but it didn't stop there. While the world was still processing the attack on U.S. soil, Iran launched additional missiles deep into Israeli territory, targeting Tel Aviv, the heart of Israel's urban and military infrastructure. The strikes were not merely symbolic. They hit critical military logistics centers, causing massive explosions. The situation quickly escalated as reports began pouring in from the affected areas, buildings reduced to rubble, civilian casualties mounting, and panic spreading across the region. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in a televised statement, made it clear that the attack was not just a warning, but a decisive act of retaliation. "We will not remain silent. Every loss we suffer will be paid by our enemies at full price," Khamenei declared, vowing to continue the fight if provoked further. This statement signaled Iran's determination to not only defend itself, but to assert its power on the global stage. For Iran, this was not just a response to an attack. It was a declaration that they would no longer allow foreign interference in their sovereignty, as the missiles rained down on Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beersheba. The full extent of Iran's military capabilities became apparent. Targets included energy facilities, industrial zones, and key infrastructure that had been built over decades of development. In Tel Aviv, one of the country's most important logistical hubs was hit, sending a shockwave through the heart of the city. The attack on the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba was particularly devastating, with emergency responders scrambling to save those injured in the attack. The missile strikes had a lasting impact on both military and civilian targets. Although many of the missiles were intercepted by Israeli defense systems, they still managed to inflict significant damage, particularly to civilian areas. At least 24 people lost their lives in the initial rounds of missile strikes, with more than 2,500 people injured, ranging from light to severe. The casualty count continues to rise as the full scale of the destruction becomes clearer. The atmosphere in Israel was one of disbelief as people tried to make sense of the unfolding events. Sirens filled the air, and people took refuge in shelters, their lives turned upside down in an instant. The response from the international community was swift yet divided. On the one hand, the United States and its allies, including the United Kingdom, expressed unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself against aggression. On the other hand, Russia and China, two global powers with vested interests in the Middle East, condemned the actions of the United States and Israel, asserting that Iran had every right to retaliate. The situation quickly became a diplomatic chess match, with each side trying to navigate the complexities of international law, regional security, and military power. The United Nations issued calls for de-escalation, urging both sides to return to the negotiating table, but these calls came too late. The damage had been done, and the region was on the brink of something much larger. The attacks on Tel Aviv and the U.S. military base in Qatar were not merely symbolic retaliations. They were an act of war. Iran had made it clear that it would not tolerate the destruction of its strategic facilities without consequences. This marked a dangerous shift in the region's security dynamics. The geopolitical consequences were immediate. The United States, already embroiled in a host of military and diplomatic engagements around the world, now found itself at the center of a potential regional war. Israel, long regarded as the dominant military power in the region, now faced a real threat to its existence. And Iran, once seen as a regional pariah, was emerging as a formidable power with the ability to challenge the West in a way few had anticipated. The balance of power in the Middle East was shifting, and the international community was watching closely, unsure of what would come next. In the days that followed, the international community began to grapple with the ramifications of Iran's actions. The European Union called for immediate de-escalation, urging both Iran and the United States to return to negotiations and avoid further bloodshed. But the reality on the ground was far more complicated. The United States, while expressing its support for Israel, also recognized the potential for this conflict to spiral out of control. President Biden called for calm, but the pressure to support Israel in its time of need was immense. At the same time, regional powers like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait began to voice their concerns. The Gulf states were particularly worried about the impact of the conflict on their economies, particularly in relation to the region's oil exports. The threat to shipping routes, especially through the Strait of Hormuz, was becoming increasingly real. Iran had already warned that it would block this critical passage if its demands were not met, and the international community began to understand the full extent of the strategic importance of this region. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz became one of the most talked about topics in international diplomatic circles. With Iran's potential to disrupt global oil supplies, the stakes of this conflict reached far beyond the Middle East. The world's economy was directly tied to the security of the Gulf, and any disruption to oil production could have disastrous consequences for global markets. In the midst of all this, Iran's actions continued to send shockwaves through the region. Its missile strikes, which were carefully calculated and strategically timed, were not just a response to the airstrikes by the United States and Israel. They were part of a larger strategy to assert Iran's regional dominance and challenge the influence of Western powers in the Middle East. Iran had made it clear that it would not be pushed around, and it was willing to take aggressive steps to defend its interests. The question now facing the world is simple: how will this conflict play out? Will the United States and Israel continue to press their military objectives, or will the pressure from regional and global powers force them to reconsider their approach? Will Iran back down, or will it continue to escalate its response, potentially leading to a full-scale regional war? The events that have unfolded over the past few days have set in motion a series of consequences that will likely play out over the coming weeks, months, and even years. The balance of power in the Middle East has shifted, and the world is watching closely to see how this crisis unfolds. As for Iran, it has sent a clear message to the world: they will not be bullied, and they will not allow foreign powers to dictate their future. Iran's response has been decisive and has shown the world that it is capable of defending itself and projecting power on the global stage. The next steps in this crisis will determine the future of the Middle East and the international order. Will diplomacy prevail, or will the region be plunged into a wider conflict that could have far-reaching consequences for the entire world? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: the Middle East will never be the same again. This represents the beginning of a more in-depth narrative. The script will continue in the same vein, expanding further into the geopolitical context, reactions and detailed analyses of military strategies, historical context, and potential global ramifications.